authority or?
Get started. It hit 1 o'clock, but I know we're waiting for probably a couple people. But
So I was saying before, so I think Olivia
Olivia
Wiseman and Becky Holt will probably be joining.
they're both on the chat right now, so they're good.
Excellent. And then I think that, I'm not sure if it's both Dr. Kelleher and Dr. Travis or one or the other. Typically, we arrange a schedule so that one of them could be here. But I know they also have a 12 o'clock, so they normally will come in they may come in 5 to 12, 10 minutes after we kind of get going.
Sure.
So.
Why? Austin?
Yeah.
Okay, there's no Slack.
Oh, yeah. I need the adapter. Sorry, I don't have an HDMI. I don't know.
I offered to share my screen, but then I can't take notes, which was our issue.
I started a notes document
Yes,
the
I'm
other
in it.
day. Okay. Because I knew we were gonna forget to talk about certain things, so I didn't write them down somewhere.
And I'll take notes as well. Anna.
Okay, I'm in it for right now and I'm happy to do it. Okay.
Yeah,
I
if you're
think
like talking or something, I can try to
thank
fill
you.
in. Yeah.
Austin's gonna leave a little bit early too, so I'll probably take over the Zoom. And so if you want to take over the notes at that point, that would be amazing.
Sure.
Should we download the articles and send them to him via email now?
Yeah, we should. I'm just gonna project it over.
Okay, you get that, I'll get the proposals. I wish I hadn't closed them all. I had them all open.
I'll go to see my parents on team in Naples.
Are they living down in Naples?
They just rent their snowbirds.
That's my neck of the woods. I mean, not super close to where I am, but I mean, I can't afford to live in Naples, but I live about.
I'll go now.
I don't know if that's a projector.
21 is the one.
A lot of people in my old town live in Benita.
Benita Springs?
It's like everyone from Rockville retires.
We can get there.
I
So
think
my parents have a
Brandon
lot
just
of friends
sent
like
me.
there and. some
Okay,
of
but I thought you
Myers
put it in
and
the,
Naples, so It's like.
Yeah.
It's there, it's there.
Well, and the.
I was sort of like,
Communities
sort
were
of-
specifically set up with that in mind, so they built like, so.
Yeah.
He's
It's
my
also
great,
the fifth, which is cool. I assume that's the
Who's my
date. with them.
grandma's baby brother, who's the only one of that generation is still alive, so I think he's my great uncle, I think, whatever. So he's gonna be 100 next year. I think he just had his birthday and turned 99. But he lives, it's a townhouse. But you go inside it and it doesn't look like a townhouse, like, so it has
The
the
projector's just.
luxury of being really nice house.
Yeah.
But
Awesome.
it doesn't have all of the.
I pressed
upkeep you
on,
have to Deal with
Gonna go.
the landscaping.
Yeah.
ridiculous
Where the
manicured,
the
like,
union people
they
go.
have, communal, there's a pool area that goes in
See,
it.
we're
they have
to
this
do
clubhouse
another
on
room.
it, and- But they're not attached.
Yeah, I mean, put the
They're
words,
actually
if we'll have printed copies and stuff.
Yeah,
Later with the quotation, but-
and we can show it to the people on Zoom,
It's got-
but
it's got-
Yeah, let's have
you need a
to-
real estate developer.
I guess do that.
And
It went to.
So, I mean, it's okay. But it's weird because it's almost like if you took an apartment or, condo and just ratcheted it up to super luxurious. But he's got a whole group of people that many of them he knew when he was up north. And they all moved to this, like, one person heard about it and they're like, oh, you need to come see it. So they all bought the place.
And they're all looking for it. Yeah. But since COVID, it's just said like prices just. Yeah, like renting, finding a place, they just really. Doing place.
So the thing that's weird is, because the community that I grew up in was more of a blue collar retirement community. It didn't really have a lot of expensive places to live. But now that, short-term rentals have become so easy to facilitate with third-party management and websites. The kids from up north or wherever they live inherit the houses, they don't flip them and turn them around anymore. They just flip them around as a rent.
Yep.
And so the inventory stays
Mhm.
relatively low,
Yeah,
which keeps the prices high.
yeah, 'cause you have these houses that are not even being lived in.
Mhm. Only being used as short-term rentals.
Yeah.
So. And the demand appears to be, like in my hometown, the demand is now starting to flatten out, like it's starting to come back down, but for a while, like.
A lot of areas, like even up there, they can't do short term rentals, they will have like.
Ninety day minimum, yeah, 90 day minimum.
How are you?
We were just waiting for you.
Lunch. No, no, good, I found nothing, and with complications here on this very, very hard.
Sweet.
No, it's not that sweet.
So the goal for today is to not have a fire drill, or to not have a fire in the building
Yeah.
as we're bargaining, that's.
That's a fantastic goal.
If we can have that as just our baseline,
Yeah, to have like 2 hours.
Yeah. Not having to stand out in the courtyard and find another room.
Most projectors on, just stop projecting. There you go.
It even looks like it's on.
I know.
That is weird.
There's nothing showing up, and there's a blank screen button, but it's not on.
Okay. I have Austin, myself for some reason, which is fine. Austin, Ava, who's not here, Brandon, I need Jacob.
Mhm.
That's why I added myself, because I started to type Jacob when it types me. I have Patrick, Olivia, Judy, Robert, and Tom, and I'm missing Becky.
Mhm.
That's everybody, right?
That's everybody from our side.
I think
Yes, we should be good.
Yeah, I don't think Dr. Kelleher's coming today.
Okey dokey. Those should be in your inbox.
Yep.
There's 4 of them. Didn't notice your fancy cup. We're into the fancy cup craze.
I just got it, or I just got it, I mean, my wife bought it for me last week, so.
So is like Yeti stock tanking, and now Stanley
Stanley's
stock
up,
is
yeah.
like up, and everybody's like, Yeti, that's 2020.
I know, I have a hydro flask and I was giving a lecture to my undergrads recently about like consumption. And I was like, Stanley cup, and I was like, I mean, I'm no better, I do have a hydro flask, but like. It's all the same, just a size one day.
Well, actually, Stanley recently had issues with something they use in their cup as a potential safety hazard or something. Didn't they?
There was something on TikTok about someone testing it for like a lead on the outside, but.
I
Just single
think,
Saw on TikTok, so I don't know the validity of that, I haven't done my. fact
yeah,
check.
I think what happened was it was like there's like something to use at the bottom to seal it on the outside, had a bit of lead in it. Yeah, it wasn't inside the cup, it was outside, but I guess somebody tested it and then started saying, yeah, there's lead in the cup. And then,
Yeah.
just kind of spread from there.
Yeah,
All right, I've got your email. Where would you like to start?
Cool. We have a couple points before we get into the articles, and I guess we
Yes.
can start there since Jacob.
yes, he should be here,
Reading the
hopefully.
articles.
We can, I mean, we don't, I mean, if you want to wait, that's cool too.
Yeah, he should have a bunch of printed copies and stuff,
He
so.
said he'd be about 10 minutes late and it's 09, so.
All right, let's wait another minute or two.
But a couple of questions we had just in general for you guys.
Sure.
So with the latest agreement we had, part of that agreement for the raises was the additional data set on how the raises were implemented to other graduate students.
Mhm.
And the timeline for that was, I believe, 4 weeks after the first paycheck where the raises were implemented. We have not received that yet.
All right, let me check with class and comp. I actually just met with them yesterday about reviewing a lot of the different files. One of the things that we're trying to do, because we know that both you guys and UFF have made quite a few data requests. What we're trying to do is create one master query that we could use for any of the requests you have. In other words, we'll just have all the lines on there. Because
Right.
there's like 3 different things that you request, and what we'd rather do is just say, look, let's just put all of them in. And that way we can just give it to you every time you're asking for
They don't
it.
have to worry about it. It's all
As
ready
opposed to
go.
making
Yeah.
like, oh, this is the January query that they need. This is the August query that they need. This is the one we do whenever we do raises. Because once we get it set up correctly, if it has everything you need, then we can just kind of hit the button, so to speak. So I will meet with, I have a conversation coming up with them probably tomorrow anyway, so I will check on that.
Okay.
It should be a quick turnaround.
And then the second question is, we've gotten a lot of questions from GAs about the outside work restrictions.
Mhm.
And their departments are not aware of the changes to those restrictions at all. So we're wondering what you guys can do to help distribute that information to the departments to make sure all of them are aware, or if you've already distributed it, maybe do it again, because a lot of departments are apparently not aware of those changes, so that there's confusion between those different levels.
Yeah, what's the method of which it's being communicated to your folks? Is it like still showing up in offer letters that they can't have outside work? Like, how is it coming to them, or is it just kind of a
It's
wider range?
When they're discussing with their departments about potentially getting another job and doing that, their departments and the professors are not aware of any changes. So
Okay.
at some point, that communication is just being lost before the GAs are implementing. And so
Okay.
they're getting scared to get second jobs because
Okay,
they don't know what's going on.
all right.
These may be students on the graduate, the old funding award.
Mhm.
So I don't think it pertains to all graduate students. From the previous dean, there was a funding award
Mhm.
that did say in its provision. However, our new dean, on all that from previous and her current awards, that is reversed.
Okay.
That's not allowed.
All right,
So
maybe we
they-
can, maybe we can circle back and have that, we'll have a chat
Yeah.
after this meeting about how to make sure that we get that
Yeah.
succinctly communicated.
Mhm. Because we could also bring it up to, we do the associate deans meetings. we
Right.
meet with. We could also verbally say it to them as well.
Okay. All right, yeah, we'll work on that too.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, those are our two main points. Jacob said to maybe start with Arthur because he's running a little bit later than he expected, so,
He's on his bike.
yeah, he's coming in.
Yeah.
Which article did you want to start? We can probably start with Article 22. That one's got,
That's, yeah, yours.
it's very small changes, relative to some of the others, so,
I have, is that the one that's just dated 2/8?
yes,
Okay.
sorry, I named it the date we were gonna present it,
That's fine.
not anything else. So it's very small changes on here, so a lot of the dates for the timelines for the grievance
Share
procedure,
your screen.
oh, I'm sorry.
22.
Uh, Okay. There you go. So yeah, it's very kind of small changes. First page is nothing. Second page, I think, just has the change of a timeline at the end from 30 to 45 days. On page 3, I made a small grammatical fix because it just said with college deans, so I just added the word the. Again, extension of that timeline from 25 to 45 days on 22.11. And then moving down to 22.18, so this is on time limits. So this is just adding some extra stipulations. So we have strict time limits for the grievance procedure. This is allowing for, if both parties agree, to extend it. So if they need more time to go through the grievance procedure. The grievant may submit a written request to postpone a step by up to 15 days. And then that can be done multiple times, but each step has to be granted by the hearing officer. And then they can cancel that sort of postponement whenever they feel like they're ready. So if they think they need an extra 15 days, but they only need an extra 5, they're allowed to just kind of cancel it and get everyone back on track as soon as possible. And then for 22.20, the retroactivity that was limited to 35 days, but with the extension of the timeline for the grievances. And to match some of the other kind of grievance procedures I've seen in other contracts, I extended that to 120 days. And then going down to 22.24, I mislabeled one of them improperly. So for the selection of arbitration panel, this is just if there are more gaps in the panel, you can submit more names to fill vacancies. We didn't have anything about that in there, so I just figured that would be something to add in for the future. And then for implementation, we have unless the parties have 7 days to implement the grievance unless otherwise provided. So if there's specific cases or the mutual agreement of the parties, so if there's something that we say, okay, this, we've agreed to the end of this grievance, but we know we're going to need 6 months to solve this, then we can agree to extend it beyond that timeline. That kind of just sets a starting boundary for implementation of things.
Could you expand on that a little bit? I'm not 100% sure on which cases would 22.24 apply to? you
So
say- when
it
you
should be
say-
22.25. I've misnumbered it.
Right,
There's the
but-
two of them, yeah.
With respect, it says upon resolution of the grievance, does that mean if the grievance is awarded? Or if the arbitration awards the grievance? Like when you say resolution of the grievance?
So if upon resolution of any grievance, so that's at the end result, you know, I'm not very familiar with a lot of
Right.
the end things, but at the very end, if, you know, there is a remedy that has been instructed to be included
At any of the steps?
at any of the steps.
Okay.
Up into including the final one, then you have 7 days to do that, unless we agree that we need more time to solve that. So if we're on step 1 and there's a remedy, but you're like, I'm gonna need longer for this, we can agree to postpone it until, you know, the end of the entire grievance process, if we would like to.
Okay. All right, I have a question back up in, I think it's the second point. So in your proposed changes to 22.18.
Yeah.
If I combine what you have under 22.18B, which is that the initial request is granted automatically.
Right.
With the extension from 30 to 45, we effectively have an extension of 30 days to 60 days. If I'm reading that I'm assuming that's your intention. I'm reading it sort of plainly. That's correct.
Yeah, so we're upping the base timeline to give everyone more time and take that stress off, because sometimes when we're doing this, a lot of our grievance team gets overwhelmed. And then if the grievant themselves thinks that they need a postponement, then they can ask for those 15 days.
Olivia, did you have any questions on this one?
No, in that 22.18, am I correct in reading that the first sentence of the original language, all time limits contained in this article, is essentially the same as what's in 22.18A?
Yeah, so that should have been removed, so to put it in 22.18A.
The only difference I see is the words in writing. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something there. But
No, that's intended to be the same thing.
Okay.
The same intent as the original language.
Is there a particular situation or scenario that's driving the ask for more time, or is it just more time because inherently beneficial?
I've not worked with our grievance team, so there's a lot of the specifics I'm not aware of in terms of specific things, but I do know one of their main concerns a lot of times with these grievances are the timeline and getting things set up and making sure things are done in time. And especially as they try to expand the grievance team and make sure everything is taken care of, I think they were concerned that time was going to be, you know, one of their biggest factors in making sure they could treat everyone to the same degree and make sure they got their formal process. So the extension of time is mostly just to make sure that that stress is not on either side, that each grievance can be treated with the proper respect and without worrying about we only have 5 more days to finish this.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, I mean, we'll have some discussion about this. I think it's relatively straightforward, but I think we understand what you're asking for. We'll chat about which parts, if any, if we have additional questions or responses to each of the provisions.
Do you have anything you want to?
No, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep up.
No, you're good.
No, I think it might be worthwhile to note that you met with them,
Yeah,
right? And so in the question of like, where is this coming from? Like Austin talked with the grievance team directly, and these were the concerns that they raised.
Okay. Yeah, so I meet with Javi and Zoe every Wednesday for about an hour and a half, and so we've got regular communication every week on a weekly basis.
okay, I think Dave's getting here as fast as he can, but we'll keep moving along until he does.
Okay.
So what article would be good to be next? What do you think?
He worked on 7 and 16, so maybe Brandon, do you want to
Yeah.
do 20?
I could do 21.
Okay, Brandon, do you want to share your screen on
Yeah, I
your
can
end?
do that.
Okay. We'll do Article 21.
21.
There you go.
I think a response that's been long time coming.
Yeah.
Is it visible? Good.
Yes.
So Article 21, so just responding to some of the changes that from your proposal last time. So starting with just cause for A. I noticed there was a removal of this line that directly affects the university. Or the interest of the university. I wasn't sure what the reasoning was behind that. I feel like it's important to something to have in there, that distinction, because um I f- I mean, I can't really come up with an example off the top of my head of misconduct that would not affect the interest of the university, but still would be just cause. I'm not sure like if that comes up a lot.
Sure.
But
I mean, I can give you, if you want to pause,
yeah.
I can give you a couple examples on that one.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is the fact that it's an additional test that we would have to prove, not just the violation of a regulation or the CBA. It would be a higher threshold to say, in addition to being a violation on its face, we also have to assume that we also would then have to demonstrate that the misconduct or incompetency directly affects the interest of the university. I'll give you kind of an extreme example. Let's say we have somebody who's late to work every day. Maybe it's not a problem, but maybe it is. I don't want to be in a situation where the university has to prove that, incessant tardiness somehow meets a threshold that would be determined to directly affect the interest of the university. I think there are some things that, especially if they're habitual or relatively could be conceived as minor and not necessarily directly affecting the interest of the university. I just don't think I want to have to get into that argument every time.
But
That's
wouldn't like any, but in that example with tardiness, that would affect, if that's affecting their performance or their job, wouldn't that be affecting the interest of the university?
well, if I was defending someone and I had to pass this threshold, I'd be like, look, okay, so I came in 5 minutes late. You know what I did? I stayed 5 minutes later. I got all my work done. And we would just face all type, in my opinion, I think we could face a bunch of defenses where the employee would then be trying to represent that look, just merely demonstrating that I engaged in misconduct or incompetency is not sufficient. It then becomes incumbent to prove that it actually affected the interest of the university. And I get, it's a threshold.
Okay.
I just don't.
Okay. Would in that case, then is there, because I had I'm not 100% clear on this, but I had another worry was really, without that line, could there be something that like an employee would do like in their personal time or something that could be construed as misconduct, but since it's like on their own time or personal time, it doesn't affect the interest of the university? Like something, maybe like, I don't know, like social media posts or stuff like that. Like, would that fall under just cause in that case, if there's disciplinary action based on like
So
something they personally do?
I think there are probably examples that we could demonstrate that there was a significant impact on the employer based on the employee's activity. But I also am going to defer to Olivia's explanation. And I don't think we necessarily get into contemplating the intersection of, say, example, First Amendment rights
Right.
and, and all that. I mean, there is a
Okay.
lot of case law about, First Amendment restrictions as
Yeah.
employees and that kind of stuff. I don't think we need to necessarily go through all that here.
Mhm.
But I think that, I mean, I understand what you're concerned about. I mean, it's almost
Yeah.
like some sort of substantive qualifier to say it's not something, it's something of substance. It's not something that's
Right.
it's not something minor.
Right.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of the sentiment that I'm picking up from you.
Yeah, because I guess when I was reading this, I was just thinking like, what if, what if somebody does something completely that may be completely innocuous to the university, like doesn't affect their job or anything on like the outcome of their, work or whatever, but could be construed as like misconduct, and then therefore you can be disciplined even though it really didn't affect the university at all. And I guess the first thing that did pop into my mind was behavior outside work on like online on social media, because there like you said, there's been a lot on that. But that's kind of the first thing that popped in my mind, but I wasn't sure there may be other examples where that occur. Like, there's also, GAs come onto the campus as a student, so if they do something as a student that's not affecting the interest of the university. I know there's other articles that relate to student conduct, like and whatnot, but something like that as well, then they could. I don't want the university to justify that as just cause when it really had nothing to do with being an employee as well.
I think we'll have some conversation about that phrase again.
Okay. Maybe there's another way to phrase it to kind of get that across without having to set like this higher bar that you're worried
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I understand I think I understand the spirit of what you're trying to get
Yeah.
across.
Okay, great. All right, then moving on for this 21 point C, I think we pretty much agreed on the change in the language here. Just some minor changes to the wording, and it was moved down to C here. All right, so
Wait.
back to
Brandon, where are you? Minor changes that we'd already agreed upon in, okay, 21-1, sorry.
yeah. So the changes aren't showing here. Maybe I can pull up the full book real quick. To show the. I guess I don't know why C is there. Okay, so this was the original. Retains the right to impose disciplinary action on termination, including but not limited to suspension with or without pay. Provided the punishment degree, discipline may be related to behavior, action subject to discipline. So there's just a little bit more added to that. I added this line that was crossed out, and I left it crossed out. The defined in 21.2 other than termination. The university retains the right to impose disciplinary action other than termination, including but not limited to suspension with or without pay. The degree discipline may related to behavior, action subject to discipline. So there's some minor word changing there, just make it a little bit more clear. So, which was in their last proposal. All right, so 21.2. I accept most of the changes I left, so this moved it back to progressive discipline. We kept on this is the line that I proposed that was kept in your proposal for B, is properly informed, in 21.4 down here for the notice. So the biggest change here is this for outline below. The may include but are not limited to the following. So I wanted to those kind of some of the things we've talked about before. I think it would be better if there's different types of discipline other than what's listed here that could be enacted. I think it's better to list it here than just to leave it completely like open and broad. Because I mean I feel like it's better for us and the employees to know the process of discipline and everything that can happen with it, and not just have like may include but are not limited to following could have just something else that was never in the contract that could be a disciplinary action that they were not aware of but can be enacted because of this line. I think we are we want to work with if there's other types of disciplinary actions that is typically used, then I think it's great to put them down here instead of just leaving it open. So that's really what we're trying to get at here. We're just trying to more narrowly can list what the actions that can be taken. So is there anything you want to add on that, or
Hang on one second. I'm just looking at something real fast.
okay.
We've gone back and forth enough. I'm trying to actually pull I want to just compare it to the original language at this point.
Oh yeah, so right now the original language here, the sanction for disciplinary action that may be imposed on an employee may include but are not limited to following, and it still has the same 4 that we have in the proposal.
Gotcha.
It's just rip and reprimand containing just some pretty. It's the actions are the same. It's just whether it's instead of can only be this or may include but are not limited to following, just changing that. So what I'm we would just like if there's other disciplinary actions that are taken but are not listed here. I feel we think it's better to have it listed here. So on the on an employee side, where completely aware of all disciplinary actions that can be taken and, in those steps and how this progressive discipline works instead of just leaving it open where other disciplinary actions could be taken that are just not listed here.
So I just want to make sure. So the intention is that the list is comprehensive and exhaustive, and there's no other types of discipline other than what is specifically enumerated. That's the intention.
Right. Yes.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah. All right. So moving on for 21.3, I think we've come to an agreement about the paid leave during investigation. There was this, you removed the line notification investigating paid leave must follow requirements for all other disciplinary actions as described in 21.4. This was removed, this was removed in the last proposal. I wasn't sure why. I think it's good just to have that standard kind of in this article for 21.4 for providing this notice. Whether it's a disciplinary action or the investigatory paid leave. But the other language I've kept in here. That was you added and stricken out from your last proposal here. So the paid leave is not subject to provision in Article 8. Notification of this investigatory paid leave must follow the requirements for all other disciplinary actions as described in 21.4 to notice of discipline.
So I guess I'm just not sure how that could even work, Brandon. How could we follow all the other requirements in 21?
Include the date, I guess, if they contain the misconduct that's being investigated, provide notice of the discipline imposed. Okay, so I guess B would be the problem, because I think including the date, start and end dates of the paid leave and then being delivered and then want to contest it, what they have time to contest it. So I think would be I would see maybe B might be the issue.
Well, I actually have an issue with multiple parts because
Okay.
so what we're doing, I think effectively, I don't know if this is your intention or not. The way I'm reading what you've proposed is this. It actually provides an opportunity for employees to contest the investigation and the paid leave itself. Because if it has to subscribe to 21.4, which contains a process by which they can contest it, we would now be in a situation where you would have almost like a super due process.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
before we conduct the investigation, you see what I'm where I'm kind
of. Okay. Maybe we just need another subsection under here that describes the notice in the proper terms then, just for the investigatory paid leave. Okay.
Yeah, maybe rather than referring to 21.4, if you would just specifically list the things that you really want to make sure that happen.
Okay.
It would probably be less confusing. Would that be okay?
Yeah. That can do that.
Let's take and we'll take a fresh look at it.
Yeah.
With that in mind.
I was just I guess I was just trying to keep just try to keep the same standard for everything, but I see the concern there. But right. I can add that in as a subsection.
Yeah, there's another component too where the employer is not typically required to give the comprehensive entirety of all evidence, information, and description of the exact allegations prior to conducting the administrative interview. We have to give a general nature of the violation. Robert, I don't know if you want to clarify kind of how I'm explaining this, but there are some limitations in terms of exactly what we have to reveal prior to conducting an investigation of the employee.
Right.
So being explicit about the exact allegation prior to the interview is probably not something we're going to be interested in.
I think we could actually do it effectively.
Yeah.
Because so much comes out in the investigation that we would continually be putting someone back on notice.
Right. So.
Okay.
So just keep
in a counter proposal, if you want to add what you'd like to see in that notification, and then in our proposal back, we can build on top of that. That's fine. But I understand your concerns there, and yeah, we can do a separate subsection under here just for notice for this.
Okay.
Moving on for 21.5, I cleaned it up a lot because there was a lot of the changes that have been moved to Article 5 for the PIP. So the language here is pretty close to what the original language was. It's just adding this line that was added in your counter proposal just to explain what the EAP is. Per the employee assistant program provides counseling like work-life services. Employees may voluntarily participate in EAP or may be mandated to participate by their supervisor, where the original contract just had just talk didn't explain what it was. It just had that it can't be used for disciplinary action or for this article, which is still left in there. And then this last line, however, failure to comply with a mandated referral to EAP may serve as basis for disciplinary action. So, and then so that's all. This has stayed the same. So for 20.9, in your last proposal, we completely stricken it out. I think but we're still pretty worried about trying to minimize discrimination. I know you may still be waiting for some guidance about how to handle this. We added in this concession. So instead of this only, because before it would have been only for any type of infraction violating this law, they can only be disciplined with a written reprimand, which was what the language before that was stricken out. So instead, as a concession, we just put on their first offense as a consequence for violating this law, and I stricken out and cannot be suspended or terminated. So what this is saying is, like, if an employee is being disciplined for violating this law, if it's their first offense for this type of disciplinary for this issue, then they can only be disciplined with a written reprimand and not anything else. But this is for the first offense. Is there any questions, or otherwise that's pretty much it for?
No, I don't really have a question. I mean, I think I have a statement that's probably somewhat similar to the statement we made on this topic last time, and that is, I think we find it problematic if we're going to begin constraining the university's response to a particular type of behavioral infraction and completely predetermining the outcome before we even have an opportunity to investigate and weigh the evidence. I don't know, Robert, if you have, I mean, that's just my first reaction about the provision in general. It almost doesn't matter what the behavior is to some extent.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because there's so much context that could drive where we land with respect to what level of discipline may be appropriate, and to just say we can't do beyond this. I think that is a real restriction on the management rights that we have.
So, I mean, I think we've heard loud and clear that this is an important topic to you. I mean, obviously we will consider it as part of your proposal. But I just want to be clear that on its first read, I think we're probably going to still find it somewhat problematic. It doesn't mean we won't come up with something in response. But I don't know if we will have
maybe
maybe
there's some other language I could put in here to not as narrowly construed it, like for the first of. I think first offense is doing for first offense is a pretty big concession. And I think that maybe we can we would look at something like, instead of a written reprimand, maybe just instead not allowing termination on the first offense for this, something like that. If that's something you want to look at, we would consider that. But yeah, we can talk about it once we had a chance to.
Okay, I think just as a think about while we're working on responding, follow me on this line of reasoning. I don't think that we would be in a position of proposing sort of the reciprocal provision. In other words, any employee who specifically exhibits this particular behavior must be terminated. Like, you know what I'm saying? I don't think there's a reciprocal. I don't think we would be interested in constraining it the other direction either. But I understand. I understand what the interest is. We will work on something.
Maybe some language about, like, maybe some acknowledgement or some guarantees for how the investigation or how it'd be handled, something like that. Sometimes we're just having some protections on this to minimize discrimination is very important. So, yeah.
I'm so confused on the kind of broad scope you guys are talking about when it comes to this sort of stuff, because I mean, we're limited to very specifically a single law and on the first offense.
Right.
So I'm kind of where are we getting the broad scope of things to help us if we're gonna narrow this down and make it, to the nuance that we're trying to talk about, but maybe we don't have properly in the text here. What's the broad scope that we would need to narrow down there?
No, I think the broad scope is what we're more concerned about, because now it's a provision on this. Are we gonna start actually having a contract that's filled with all these conceivable behaviors that an employee may or may not engage in, with almost like a discipline matrix of, if you do this, then you get this. Exactly. If you do this, then you get this. If you do this, then you get this.
Or you could reject any of those offerings, right? Because this is a specific case for a specific law. We're not opening the door. Well, we are saying, this is a thing that you could do in the contract, but that would be something that would have to be bargained for in any step of the way, right?
Absolutely. No, you're exactly right. I'm saying in general, philosophically speaking, in general, we're not gonna be interested as a general position of saying these specific behaviors are gonna result in this type of discipline.
But we're not asking for it to be done in general. We're asking for it to be done in a very specific situation.
No, I
and
think
we're not
we get
trying
that.
To list multiple situations or generalize it. So
Right.
if you say you're opposed to it in the abstract, can you meet us on the specific level and explain why we're not asking for it in the abstract? We're asking for it in the specific. So can you address why you are opposed to it in this specific?
Yeah, I think Robert said it one way, I'll say it differently. I think it's a significant impingement on managerial rights based on the specific fact pattern of a case to say, irrespective of the fact pattern of a case, if this is the allegation, you will and you must and you shall only discipline in this manner. And I think that any given employee relations investigation or any given moment of discipline has enough factual variation that it may be one of the most important components of the discipline article is the fact that we're permitted to skip steps, and we can assign a more intense level of discipline depending on the moment. Now, we still have to meet the threshold of, comparator cases, and all those other responsibilities still are on us. But to specifically constrain an assignment of discipline in a particular case of a particular behavior, I don't think we're gonna be interested in that. Because I think there are ways that you could say that in one description, this is a very minor case, but there's also situations where it could be a very major case, even though it's the same core violation.
Presumably in that case, there would be another charge in an extreme case that involved the going against CSSB 1674. If you're picturing a scenario where that's more extreme, most likely there would be another infraction that could be charged simultaneously and punished in a more extreme way. I can't imagine something that strictly violates CSSB 1674 and no other laws that is so extreme that it needs more than a written reprimand on the first offense. I would be interested to hear an extreme case that only violates that specific thing and no other laws that you are concerned.
So I guess we could get into the argument about whether or not if we give a directive to all employees, Robert, if we were to systematically issue by email, written letter to all and by public notice and said in all their faculty meetings and all their staff meetings, employment meetings, you will not violate this law. Are we then going to get into an argument that not only did you violate it, but you're also insubordinate? I guess I'm worried about getting into sort of these legal, to your point about stacking charges, right? So you engaged in this misbehavior, this misconduct. In addition, there was all these secondary or tertiary ways that we could describe it. That could have also been another violation of another regulation or something. I mean,
yeah. I mean, intentionality is really important, and
right.
The level of egregious conduct in the context of that violation, I think needs to be weighed. And it could be cases where it wouldn't even rise to a level of a
written
reprimand. So in one sense, you're kind of forcing our hand that we must do it this way, when we say we don't even want to do it this way. In the other sense, you're forcing our hand that we say,
Well,
this is more.
Yeah.
the language right now says can only be disciplined. So, but it's up to the university to, it's not saying must be disciplined, can only be disciplined. So I think it wouldn't be the case that you would be forced to do a written reprimand if the university wasn't gonna want to even do that. So,
and we could change the wording to can only be disciplined up to a written
yeah,
reprimand.
up to, just adding up to would just clear that up.
That's not the
There's no other
point,
instance
is
that
it?
I'm aware of in any other contract, policy, what have you, in my 10+ years of working in this space, that there's a predetermined level that must be imposed because of the
Right,
violation.
and this is an unprecedented law. too.
Yeah, it is a big thing, for
I think the end
Florida,
result
right?
is this law is discriminatory. That's the GAU's position on the, and we're not gonna be happy until we have a good protections to make sure that people are not being discriminated against.
Right.
Now, if this is not the way that you guys want to go with this, we would be happy to have a counter proposal that may be entirely different, but still provides those protections. That's what we're looking for. And I think we can
Yeah.
understand, you guys can understand where we're looking for.
Mhm.
And if you're not happy with this, we're happy to see something that gives those protections, that may be going through a different route that you guys are happier with.
Yeah, I think in a more general sense, I appreciate that, Austin. I think one of the things that I would say is, the university is constrained to acknowledge and understand things that are considered lawful by state statute. The university is not going to put itself in a position where we are going to, in some way, shape, or form, mitigate, excuse, or ameliorate an employee's ability to violate a state law.
But when you read that law, it left the disciplinary action policy up to the university. So you're not being told by state to impose these types of discipline. And if you were to agree to some type of making sure that the discipline does not get excessive, that would not be counteracting what the state has prescribed with this law.
Right,
Right.
but even to your point, in your statement, you just predetermined that anything other than this would be considered excessive. And what I'm saying is that determination should be unto that specific instance and fact pattern of that case. I think we hear you loud and clear that you feel that anything above that is excessive. I don't think we're not necessarily arguing that we don't understand that perspective. I think we get it. And I think you did a good job explaining. I think what we're saying is we have to wrestle with whether or not we believe that is in keeping with what the law requires. And whether or not we would be willing to agree to offering these protections that we don't have for, and I get your point, you believe the law is unprecedented. I hear you say that. Whether or not this is a moment whereby we are going to agree to impose restraints on ourselves to respond to misconduct by an employee. And so that's what we'll go away and we will have that conversation and we will see if we can come up with something that we think you might find acceptable.
That sounds good.
Great.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
briefly, do you guys have the full context on this? We're talking, because I don't think it's on the end of the paper, we're talking about,
It's on the back of it.
it cuts off at, 21 point. Oh, it's
It's
right
there,
at the
it's just,
bottom.
it doesn't have a space
It's
here, but there.
about, like, using the bathroom, like a gendered bathroom, which goes against the new state law that says you need to comply with like your sex. For people.
Yeah.
So we're trying to basically say like, you can only be reprimanded in a certain way for breaking this one specific rule.
And there's just no space for them, so, there they go.
Right. All right, so is that it for 21 then?
Let me
Yeah.
go back through.
Right.
Olivia, did you have any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great.
I think
Great,
we're
thank
good.
you.
We did Article 22 before you got here, so
Okay.
we can pass out paper copies if you guys want a
Yeah, would
physical
you
copy
like
of
those?
22 for your record.
That would be helpful.
Those are
Okay.
the ones that messed me up.
Sorry,
I
yeah.
printed side one, or like the odd pages, because I have to do manual double-sided. It
Mm.
collated. And when I did the other side, it did not collate.
Ah,
So
Okay.
the flipping would have been insane. Yeah. And then I ran out of color ink halfway through. So, ooh,
I think we did this one.
we
we
did.
did that one, we're
These are
passing out for your,
Okay,
for your,
gotcha. Okay, thanks.
yep.
Since I ran out of color ink, I figured seven. But since seven can be shown on a single screen without any scrolling necessary, I decided to just show it on the screen.
And you should have a copy of this in there.
You can print it, yeah, we have the copy in the email. So the first thing to note is, like we mentioned last time, we did pull that 7.3 that you had suggested last time,
Mhm.
which outlined a different process that employees could follow.
think I bumped it. That could follow, that isn't, getting them directly to our grievance team in the beginning. And we pointed out that our grievance team is experts, and we believe that even if we're not going to be taking this to like arbitration, getting them hooked up with our grievance team would help minimize any of the concerns you had, even more than if they went into those meetings alone. So we're not interested in kind of highlighting a different route that doesn't involve our grievance team.
Okay.
And then the substantial addition here is definitions of excessive workload. We didn't strike where you had added 7.2 because we do not believe this definition counters or like goes against what you had added. So I will give you a second to read that. Let me know if you need to.
Your computer is not.
I think it's that cord that has been our problem all along.
Yeah, it's just acting up.
And if I need to zoom in further, I can.
I think it's big enough.
Do you have any comments on?
Yeah, give me a second here.
Now we're just.
Are you kicking it or?
I don't believe I moved it all,
Yeah,
but.
Do you understand the relationship between the work and I'm struggling to sort of, so can you just do a math example for us?
Sure. So academic work would be indicated by signing up for credits. So if you're doing research credits,
Mhm.
perhaps you signed up for 3 hours of research credit that semester.
Okay,
That would imply 9 hours per week, 3 hours per research credit, 3 times 3 are expected as academic work. So they are relevant to our contract.
okay,
And then you also have the contracted hours that are based on your FTE. So let's assume this is a 0.5 employee, that would be 20 hours. So they would be expected to be working the 20 hours of their GA work. And the 9 hours of their academic work is irrelevant to excessive workload. So it would be 29 before you would starting to get into excessive workload. So plus 3 hours per research credit is the way that we are segmenting out the academic work
I see what you're saying.
away from the FTE time.
Yeah, okay. I think for us, and this is one that I'd really like to probably maybe caucus on. Could we caucus on this for a couple minutes and come back?
What do you mean by caucus? Your
So
team?
we're gonna go
Yeah.
have a conversation, if that's okay.
I don't
Do you
see
happen to
why
have a written copy?
I don't, but it has been emailed to you.
Okay,
you
great.
should have all the digital copies.
Okay, perfect. Let's go have a chat real quick.
What do you mean caucus is the question of the week in
Yeah.
presidential politics?
Yeah. Olivia, can I call you on the phone?
I think he just left
Okay.
the Zoom. Yeah.
I'm gonna close the door so we can caucus while y'all are out too.
Well, we won't be too terrible.
If we're gonna caucus for a minute, I think
Becky needs.
remove Becky. Becky's gone. Okay, yeah, we're good.
We're gonna start.
You want to have Becky and Olivia join on?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're gonna jump back in.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, let me, Olivia had to go to another meeting, but let me,
I don't know, but as soon as they join the Zoom, I can just admit them. Then before we get going again, do we want to switch over the owl to your computer? Because that's gonna be a weird thing for me to do when I have to leave early.
Sure, we only have 16 left. I'm honestly
true.
not even sure that we're gonna go fully up to time today.
We'll just keep it going then. We might be caucusing by the time that comes, it won't be an issue, so.
I got you. It should be pretty quick. And I connected to it a couple times now, so it's just
And just
same as
replaces
this
it
and everything,
immediately,
yeah.
right? Like people on Zoom will just be slightly confused when you have GAU goes blank and you just start being the main person.
We can be clear.
Can you just let me know when, Becky gets back in?
Yeah, I've got it open, so as soon as she joins, I'll be
Do
ready.
you wanna continue talking about 7 or are we just gonna move on?
No, we would like to talk about it a little
Okay.
more,
Okay,
but I just wanna wait for, just let me know when she pops in.
yeah.
I have to like manually move them back to the left.
Oh, that's fine.
It was working fine. I don't know what happened.
Oh. Not yet, huh?
Nope,
Well, you're recording it, right?
we are recording, yeah, we've resumed
So
it.
as long as she can access the video afterwards. Okay, so I think, we kind of want to probe your example just a little bit to make sure we grasp and understand exactly what it is that you're suggesting. Would you mind putting it back up?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? You emailed it to me. I'll just look at it on my computer. That's fine. But there. Okay, so in the example that, you would use it for 3 hours. So if they were on a 0.5 FTE
0.5 FTE,
and they were registered for 3 hours of research credit
yes,
and they go into the lab, let's just say, for a 30th hour.
Sorry, I'm
Mhm.
sharing the screen.
Yes,
My reading of your proposal is that 30th hour by default is by definition of what you proposed is excessive work.
yeah,
Okay,
Does that mean we've taken out the stuff on like averages? Cause the current contract language,
average,
to my knowledge, the current contract says like exceeding this on an average over the appointment time.
I believe that's elsewhere in the contract, but that does.
It might be catalog, it might be in the catalog, not in the contract, right? Or is that in the contract?
average?
The average. language.
I'll give it to you.
I also find that very
might be-
familiar. I believe that there
Right?
is something that.
The assignment says an average
Oh,
of
yeah,
LC on a scale.
yeah, you're right, 7,
It's in
you're
there.
right,
Yeah,
It's in there.
But I mean, the point still remains what you're saying. Yeah, if they did that every day, I mean, every week for 4 weeks or something. I don't know what the period of the average is.
I'm pretty sure it's the appointment period. So like if your FTE is 0.5, my FTE is 0.5. I'll use myself. I'm a teaching assistant, which is also much clearer.
Mhm.
So I'm not registered for any teaching credits. I'm in 9 hours. Well, I'm in 6 hours of research, 3 hours of coursework, and I'm a 0.5 FTE. So according, like my understanding right now is that my excessive workload would be if I'm working over 20 hours a week on average over the course of the entire semester. That's my read or my understanding of it as it sits right now, right? So if I work 30 hours one week and I work 10 hours one week, yeah, that 30 hours was excessive, but it averages out to not being excessive in a grievable way.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And so at least I thought that kind of would carry into, but I don't know if that was, I don't think we've had that exact conversation among our team.
Is the concern you're asking this about related to average? Because,
Mhm.
so yeah, our team brought up average. I think,
Yeah.
what is the specific concern you're worried about
Yeah,
with
I'll be-
exceeding that?
I'll be very clear. Our conversation was about the fact that we believe it is exceptionally problematic to put to contemplate academic constraints and academic limits in an employment contract. We think that's like a bridge too far. It's extremely problematic.
Us carving out academic credit is to your benefit. If we do not distinguish and go by what it says as our duties
Mhm.
in our letter of appointment and
Mhm.
say we work this many hours doing those duties,
Mhm.
that's 20 hours instead of 29 in our scenario. You need for us to have a definition that says, no, these hours don't count because they're academic. As it stands with no clarification, hours spent doing our duties fits the letter of appointment, which says we're paying you for 20 hours. It is within UF's interest to explain what parts of those 20 hours, which hours do not count to the 20 hours they're paying you for.
I think I would interpret that fundamentally differently because my problem is with the remainder. If we have an employee who is only doing 20 hours a week, 20 hours a week total of work, 20 hours of work total a week, and saying, I'm a 0.5 FTE, and this is for research, obviously, because it's different for TAs, but say a research person, and they're only in the lab a total of 20 hours a week. Okay? Only a total of 20 hours, say, that's all I'm obligated to be in here. I don't have to be in here any more than 20. I'm able to meet all of my employment requirements. You may be absolutely right. In the employment contract, we're gonna say, fine, you met your employment responsibilities. Whether or not you're meeting your academic responsibilities as a student, that's not for the employment contract to contemplate. So I would say you're right.
Okay,
But,
so
I mean-
the person could be grieving if they are their employment contract regularly, just because they are needing to do excessive workload in the frame of reference of the employment contract to meet their academic responsibilities, is what you just implied.
Well, I'm rejecting your premise in that, in your example, there are no hours a week of academic pursuit for a
That
research
is not
assistant.
true. I'm saying that UF needs to define what are academic hours and clarify that from employment hours, because as it stands, the duties described in letter of appointment currently describe the work that we do in academic work too. So
Right.
those hours could fill that 20-hour requirement. And do fill that 20-hour requirement and exceed it, and people do have to exceed it for the reason you're talking about.
Mhm.
But it doesn't make sense to be, like. In this scenario where the way that the contract is currently written, if somebody stuck to their 20-hour a week limit
Mhm.
fiercely, they would fail to meet academic goals and then be subject to termination. That is the logic of the contract as it stands without a definition taken to its ridiculous extreme.
Right.
So we could keep current contract language and have all of our graduate assistants refuse to do any work over and above 20 hours, grieve it every month when that, or, they could do 21 hours and then grieve it every month. And then eventually faculty would lodge a complaint that no GA, none of the 4,400 people are meeting their academic goals.
Mhm.
So then they're all suspended. They have to bring in a new crop of 4,400 and we start again. That is the absurd reasoning that is currently here if UF does not do what's in its interest and clarify what falls under academic work that is not part of the hours I'm paying you for, and what falls under employment hours that I am paying you for.
And
Yeah.
That's why it's in your
I was
interest.
gonna ask if I could offer another example.
Sure.
This is a person who's very close to me, works in a lab setting under a PI in the College of Medicine,
Mhm.
right? Their contract is 0.33 FTE, which means they technically only work 13.3 hours.
Mhm.
They're in the lab easily 50 hours a week.
Mhm.
We're talking 6, 7 days a week. 8 to 9 hour days during the week, right? What is the distinction between the 13.3 work hours and the other 40 hours a week they're putting in? That's what we're trying to distinguish.
Right, no, I think that's a really good example, because that was one of the things that we were gonna say. I think that this, the way you proposed it, puts it upside down in this respect. The primary relationship is a student relationship and an academic relationship, and there are huge differences. Discipline by discipline, program by program, appointment by appointment, not appointment by appointment, but program to program in terms of what it requires and what your project is, what your exact research is on. There's so much variation in terms of what's required for you to be successful, also down to the person. Even if two people are doing exactly the same type of academic pursuit in the same discipline, their own individual strengths and weaknesses could have significant variation in how much time it takes them to spend to accomplish the same academic goals.
Yeah.
So to then take that type of variation in the academic space across such a wide variety of programs and a wide variety of abilities and strengths and weaknesses, and shoehorn it into a secondary relationship, which is the employment relationship, and in some way, shape, or form constrain how the academics are going to function, I just don't think we would ever be able to agree to something like that.
How,
Yeah, that's the
if you
question.
don't want to agree to this definition, how do you propose we distinguish the work you pay us for from academic work? You have 7.2 where you say it should be distinguished.
Right.
How do you distinguish it? Go ahead.
I think we've got it right here. Workload assigned to an employee under this article is separate from the time required to do an employee's work for academic credit.
No, you're saying it should be distinguished. It should be separate. How
Yes.
is it separated? What is the definition that separates the work assigned to an employee under this article? Because I can look at the duties that includes.
Right.
And those duties are not separate from the employee's work for academic credit. So how do you say that it is separate? You're stating that as if it's a fact. Please explain how those are separate. Do a definition.
I think it's so broad, I don't think we can do it. It would be different for almost every person, depending on how closely related. So part of the problem is there's two very distinct camps. You have people that are working as GAs in labs where there's a complete overlap of their personal research work for their academic pursuit and what's going on in the lab. In other words, there's one and the same. Those are probably the most problematic. And I think like that's kind of what we're talking about, where it's almost impossible to give a definition of where does one end and where does one end and where does the next begin?
So that violates the rights of those GAs to work the time that they're paid for and no more.
Why?
Well, if we
Because
don't
you
have a-
just said that it's almost impossible to separate those. You cannot recommend a definition and they're being required to work more than 20 hours a week.
Where? Who has been required to work more than 20 hours a week?
Every single GA could not do just 20 hours a week like you opened this conversation with.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is in excess of the 20, there is, I believe there's a guidance in the graduate handbook, Tom. There's some basic guidance.
Per hour, credits per hour.
Right,
Well, they're basing it on 3. We can go with that.
right. I get that. But there's also significant variation.
Yeah,
It's different in a contractual sense than an academic guidance sense.
yeah,
You're,
and I know we're not supposed to
you're-
get into hypotheticals.
you're wandering away from the question I asked though. You could answer, but it is separate than the question I asked.
And this is what I'm saying. I think that if we got into a disagreement and an argument and GAU wanted to bring a grievance based on the fact that there was a GA who said, I'm only working my 20 hours. I'm not spending one more minute than 20 hours in the lab because that's what my appointment calls for. Okay, we can't force more than 20 hours a week on the employment side. I don't think that person's going to be academically successful, but I think it would be inappropriate for us to take employment action against the person because the employment action is limited to that part of their work. And if they want to say that I'm doing my employment work first and I'm not going to do there is no additional requirement, we can't take employment action, that's going to get handled on the academic side of the house if they don't make reasonable progress.
You are making the FTE a meaningless statement then.
Why?
Because you've just said that they could grieve this if over 20, or they could refuse to do anything more than 20, and it would mess them up academically.
Mhm.
So you're acknowledging that those are overlapping terms right now. And if you go over the amount of FTE, you're pretty much expected to meet your academic concerns, and you could even grieve that you're being forced to do your duties that are synonymous with the duties you've been hired to do for longer than 20 hours a week. But if you just stuck to 20 hours, you're going to eventually get terminated as a downstream a consequence of being like let go academic like failure.
So maybe I misunderstood your premise. Is your premise that a research assistant should only be in the lab 20 hours a week and be able to handle their
Absolutely not.
employment and their academic responsibility?
Absolutely not. I did not strike your article of distinction from academic work. I did not strike the idea that this is separate from this.
Okay,
We agree with that.
okay.
You came back in the room and said, we are worried about like trying to define how these are separate because it's an almost impossible task. And I said, it's within UF's interest to clarify what falls under FTE and what does not, so that you aren't in this absurd place where someone's insisting they should only do 20 hours a week, but now they could get like suspended for it or like, academic problems because they're only doing 20 hours a week, but they're saying, well, I'm only paid 20 hours to do these duties. So I did those duties for 20 hours. That's absurd. That is not a good situation. It's within UF's interest to clarify, you get paid for these 20 hours doing these duties. And then there's these other hours that are related to your academics that are separate.
Right.
That we don't pay you for.
Right.
And you want to do that. You've stated that this is separate than that. And we also want to do that. We did not strike that. We simply defined it. And to do that, to say these are separate, there must be a definition that separates them.
I'm with you now. Now I understand what you're saying. I'm sorry. I think I'm understanding what you're saying. So I will respond in a much more succinct fashion without all the. That definition doesn't belong in the employment contract and it actually belongs in the academic space.
So it needs to be in the employment contract because UF is our employer and UF is saying that they pay us for a certain amount of hours. Currently, that term is meaningless when someone who's paid for 0.33 hours, FTE, is spending the same amount of time at their workplace as someone who's paid for 0.5 FTE as an RA, or someone who's paid for et cetera. That FTE, that thing that these employees are being told this is what you're being employed to do becomes meaningless if you do not clarify this in our employment contract. That's the first point. The second point is, oh, sorry, I lost it. It'll come back to me. Can you reply to the first point?
Yeah, it is not, I don't think it's appropriate for us to define the academic component of the relationship in the employment contract. It's not. I don't think the university is going to be interested in a position whereby we take the academic student relationship and reduce that to a provision in the employment contract.
The thing you're defining is the FTE to exclude a chunk that we both agree does not belong in FTE.
Right, but you want to do it purely on a clock punch basis. We don't, you guys, for the most, we're not doing that.
I have a question here.
Yeah.
So like, how do we show excessive workload in this situation? If I'm a research assistant, and I'm paid for 20 hours a week, and I'm spending 50 hours in the lab, right? How do I show that that is excessive workload and not just 30 hours of academic work? How do I show that to the university when you're saying, since there's such a weird distinction, we don't have this definition? Am I choosing to spend more time in there because I'm always obviously doing 50 hours of academic work? What's the line? How do I say I'm doing excessive workload in that case?
So I think it's based on several important factors, but one of those factors is whether or not that particular person, again, the cases are different, whether or not you are literally doing exactly aligned work with your project and like what your personal research is, if it's exactly aligned with what your PI wants to
Can
do.
the theoretical example be it's perfectly aligned?
Sure,
Just for
Yeah.
simplicity's sake, if it's perfectly aligned,
perfectly aligned.
Mhm.
Okay.
please continue. I
Yeah,
just
then
wanted to.
then I think it's gonna be up to whether or not, if you meet the minimum 20 hours, it does get tough. But if you meet the minimum 20 hours and you're not willing to do one more minute, then it's on you whether or not you're making appropriate academic progress. And appropriate academic progress is a discussion between you and your academic.
That's
the
where it
academic side of the
becomes
house.
totally meaningless.
So I
You've
can work
made
100 hours
FTE
and it's not excessive workload because you could say it overlaps and that's academic work.
You've made
At that point.
FTE totally meaningless and you're making the right to a grievance an absurdity. You're
Why?
undercutting that. Because if somebody wants to work 21 hours and then grieve that they shouldn't be, and they,
Sorry, it's through an academic though process of grievance. It's not a grievance, they don't use it in the academics. So we see this where there are issues that are, because it's so threaded together, that it becomes an academic issue through the channels of that. So through like your mentor, your advisor, whatever you want to call it, the graduate coordinator, the associate dean, to the ombuds, to even to the graduate school at one point. That's where those should funnel through.
it is not though, because the
But it
union is not
but
interested.
I've gotten those calls, so there have been
But the-
cases of that. And it's, for me, it's distinct to keep employment, and this is how I guide units. Is it an employment issue? If you are working over,
We are.
right, it goes to him, it goes to the chief bargainer and through that process. If you are in medicine, take that example.
Yeah.
Above 3.3, and there's this bleeding, and you can make headway with your advisor on this, it goes through those channels to the ombuds.
I understand
Yeah.
that.
Can I ask her a question real quick? I'm wondering, do those people in those cases that you've had, that you're saying you've had those cases, do they have a definition that we can see? Like, is there a paperwork, like, is
Wait.
there a detail that we can see?
We're not interested in that because we are a labor union and we are trying to make sure that the agreements that our laborers sign with our employer that state an FTE, that our contract that provides us the right to grievance procedures continue to be meaningful. And you all are mentioning a scenario in which somebody's FTE is totally irrelevant. And like if somebody was in the same lab, if somebody was hired at 0.33 and 0.5 in the same lab, in the same program, they have the same academic expectations. They would need to work the same amount to make headway and to like not be let go as a student. Yet it's totally fine for them to be paid completely different amounts of hours because the obligation to these employees is being smuggled in on the academic end where it doesn't belong because it goes through these processes you're describing. The labor union is not interested in litigating the academic side. We want to help you distinguish the academic side so that assurances to our employees, employee assurances like FTE and the ability to grieve excessive workload, which are firmly inside an employee thing and appropriate to a labor union. We want to ensure those are meaningful.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think, so one of the assumptions that your statement is predicated upon is one that we wholly reject. And I will tell you which one that is. That is that there is a perfectly linear relationship between two different students and their ability to make exactly the same academic progress in the same exact amount of time. That is just, we're never going to agree on that. In other words, you have two people in the same lab. Let's say they're not GAs. Let's say that they're not.
Just to
GAs.
clarify, this
Yeah.
is true of every job that you're about to say, but go ahead. Every job has differing levels of efficiency of workers, but please go
But
ahead.
I'm not talking about the work hours. I'm not talking about work hours. I'm talking about academic advancement and academic achievement and academic progress. If I take two students that are not GAs, okay, even if I make almost everything about them as similar as possible, and we know that two people are not exactly the same, but I make everything about them as similar as possible in the same program, in the same discipline, your statements are predicated upon the fact that those two people will take exactly the same amount of time if you set a stopwatch to make similar academic progress. And that is just not true.
My statement reflects that I'm filling in the blank of these two people in the scenario with the average level of competence, the average level of competence. Your scenario is suggesting that people who are hired at 0.33, they could actually be at such a high level of competence that they can meet all their requirements and require less paid hours. And people who are hired at 0.5, they're actually meeting their same academic goals, and then like the amount of hours is proportional to what needs to be done in both cases. And that's fully explained by this differential in like efficiency of that's what you're implying there. Otherwise, if they were at the exact same level of worker efficiency, then one is getting paid for 1/3 of a week, and one is getting paid for 1/2 of a week, but they're working the exact same amount of time to meet their academic requirements, and the duties are fully overlapping. The only way, when you bring this variable of worker efficiency in, is you creating this weird scenario where every time that happens, most likely it was done to reflect a differential in worker efficiency such that the more efficient worker gets paid for less hours.
Okay, so
That's ridiculous.
my example was based on two people that are not employees. They're not employees. Because let's imagine like a fish tank. You are putting in a certain amount of water that's associated with your FTE and a certain amount of water that's based on your academic side. And then you're taking out this, for every person, you're taking out the exact same amount of water that's associated with their app based on a function of how many hours they're registered for. And saying that because that is the same, we can now easily identify that everything is left can't be more than the 20, assuming on a 0.5, because the first part's the same, and that's the same for every person. And what I'm saying is I think that assumption is a false assumption. And let me give you another explanation of why I believe that. And it's relevant because you're putting them together in your determination of whether or not it's excessive. So again, let's take two people who are not employees. Let's take two people who are not
Well,
employees.
why would we do that? We're a labor union. We're talking to you right now about GAs who happen to be students. I do not care.
Students who happen to be GAs.
No, we are a
Students-
labor
you're-
union
you're a
engaged in
union
labor
by
negotiations.
definition.
Yes,
To be a
you
member,
are.
You have to be a student.
To be a member of
You're
our labor
primarily a
union,
student.
you
I'm
have to
sorry.
be a laborer.
Yes, that's true.
We do not talk about people as students. You are the ones who are always saying that. That when you engage with us as a labor union, we are referring to graduate assistants, and that is primary, our relationship. That is why we are here today.
The last line of your proposal is per hour research credit they're ready. You are injecting the academic in your proposal.
We are carving it out.
You're not carving it out.
Yes, we are.
You're carving it in because your function is predicated upon how much they're registered for. I
As a
would really,
carve
I would
out,
really like to get through my
separate from
example.
FTE.
I would really like to get through my example.
It is not an example that's relevant to a labor union if it doesn't involve a laborer.
Then why do you, then let's not talk about registration at all.
Okay, a couple things. Do you just wanna talk to me? Can you give your example? I'd love to
Yeah.
hear your example.
So here's an example that I think is very practical in terms of trying to get our point across.
Yeah.
There are,
You sit down.
if you look at a variation in terms of two people that are not appointed as, they're not employees, they do not have a GA appointment.
Right.
We would not be.
Okay,
Let's
go
just
ahead.
let him finish
yeah,
it.
No, that's fine.
No,
Sorry, no, have him talk.
Look,
No, have him talk.
okay,
I'll
look,
reach my
I have a
limit. Go ahead
question.
and have him present his stuff.
I have a question. Well, 1 second here. Okay. How do we define excessive workload? We have
Yeah.
someone working 50 hours a week. They're on a 0.5 FTE, they're working 20 hours there. How do we show that they're doing excessive workload? It's an actual question. It's not trying to be a baited question here. How does the union show that they are working more than their 20 hours a week, which is both their minimum and their maximum hours that we are happy with? How do we show that they are working more than that when there is overlap or in their duties? Because we are not happy with the idea that once you're for 20 hours, if there's overlap, everything past that 20 hours
Yeah.
is by definition for academic purposes and for success, right? They are working more than they are paid for, and we need to make sure we have a process in which we can show that. Without having these definitions, it is impossible to show that. It really is, right? And I think that's where a lot of our disconnect is coming from, is we need excessive workload and we need to have a way to show excessive workload.
It is within UF's interest for us to do.
That's also why I was wondering what
the
the,
grievance process, like if this year's case,
Mhm.
somebody comes to me like, hey, I'm working 50 hours, right? It's for it to go through this process, right, where you all interview, whatever,
And we
and
investigated one.
you investigate it,
That's
and
fine.
that, I thought that was the process.
I think
Okay,
our-
so where in the contract then do you refer to? And when we go to a grievance process, we look at the contract and see, has workload, excessive workload occurred?
And I think my thing is, you know, we have these two waters in the fish tank, and we need to draw a line to say what the difference between those two waters is, because we know people have different time they need to spend on academic success, especially when it comes to research. You know, coding can take an hour, taking 12 hours, you know, but once you're over those 20 hours, we need to make sure not only we know, we need to make sure the grievance team knows when we're doing this, and we need to make sure individual employees can know when they're at the maximum. And right now, there's no way for them to know that. They pass 20 hours, but they're like, okay, well, I'll work another 30 hours. Is that for work? Is that for academics? How do you dispute that when there's that overlap? And I think that's something that we're not getting to the crux of.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a bit of an oversimplification in terms of the fact that if that GA is working an amount of hours on the academic side to make a reasonable academic progress, they feel they are making reasonable academic progress with respect to what they're registered to accomplish and the projection where they are in their program and all those types of things. And they have completed their expected assigned FTE work, and they are still being expected to work beyond that, then that is a conversation and a moment for them to either file an academic grievance because they feel they're way over what they're registered for, or to file an employment grievance if they feel they're being expected to work beyond that.
So
But
it's
to be
up to
clear,
the
you want-
employee to say, I've worked 20 hours, I've completed all my academic work, and I'm still being requested to do more. I need to grieve this. It's
And
up
to-
to the employee to decide where that line is drawn in terms of,
I think they have to be part of the conversation. I don't think it can be done objectively without asking them.
So would you want to then propose a definition where if a employee feels that they are meeting sufficient academic process and still being asked to work more hours than 20 hours a week, then that's grievable?
Well, the problem is that when it comes to the academic space, they don't get to independently determine whether or not they're making reasonable academic progress, which is why it has to be a conversation with their academic advisor.
Exactly. So because you refuse to acknowledge or carve out what is academic work, you're allowed to take this labor dispute into a place where they have no labor representation. But they are labor representation. I mean, they are represented. FTE needs to be meaningful. And this idea that we are grad students first when you're talking to a labor union is absurd. The idea that mentioning how many credits they're registered for is somehow taboo, as Antonio pointed out, is absurd as well. We are required in the same contract to be registered for a certain amount of hours to continue to be a graduate assistant.
So originally, graduate students without appointments must register for 12 credit hours. More so than what you guys are registered for. Because then, before I ever got here, made the registration to reduce the registration for contract, no employment hours, because dedicated time would be towards that. So it reduces the registration per the FTE. So without, it would be full-time graduate students is 12 credits. So it's a reduced registration based on the appointment.
and that stands today, that rule stands today?
It's in the graduate catalog.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So,
it's a chart.
so what are the implications of that?
I was just pointing out, you brought up registration requirements, because you're really, unfunded students are registered for 12 credits typically.
Mm-hmm.
That's their full-time status. Because you're employees as well, there is in the language in the catalog, based on the FTE is your registration. It reduces that registration from 12 to most of you are 9, 996. So
Okay. But that's separate from the idea that our labor contract requires us to be registered for a certain amount of hours to be considered a graduate assistant. So talking about how many hours someone is registered for in the contract is well established and it's part of the definition of even a graduate assistant in the first place.
To be an active, right, to be an active graduate student,
So-
and when you're part of a GA,
Mhm.
your registration is not based on self-funded, it's based on this. You don't have to go to 12.
So there's
You
no,
have to be an active graduate student.
so there's no issue with mentioning how many credits someone is registered for in our contract. It is already in there. That doesn't violate the separation. It's helping us separate.
Before you go, I have to leave and I have to switch over to Al, so I don't want anyone to miss the conversation here. So just-
Okay.
Just open Zoom. Brandon, are you still listening? Can you take over the notes doc,
Yes.
please? Thank you.
And you'll have to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Yeah, you need to,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
Okay, can everyone on Zoom still hear and see now, but it says Hannah Jacobs instead of UFGIU? It just says.
Okay.
recording.
I forgot to make you post.
I think it's fine.
There's
won't be able to-
co-hosts and stuff here. You're good.
It'll just keep going and eventually it'll time out.
Yeah, let me make
Gonna
sure I
wind
make
up
you the
with a
host. so it
16-hour
doesn't-
Okay, make me the host and I'll make sure that I stop it when we're done.
Okay, you're the host now.
Okay, everyone can still hear and see?
Yeah, we're good.
Oh,
Your audio on.
everything says same as speaker. Brandon, can you talk again?
Hello? Test?
Got
We can
it.
hear you.
Got it.
My
Okay.
computer was muted, which.
All right, we're good.
To prevent the feedback, probably.
Yeah.
Sorry about that little delay, but. right.
I'd like to ask a question,
Sure.
which we can talk to our grievance team as well. I think some of the issues that we're having is that, just to say it plainly, is the stuff in 7.2 that you all added
Mhm.
is fine. We have no reason to argue with that. We just don't think it's sufficient. We don't think it's sufficient. So we're trying to better explain it.
Sure.
That's our goal, right? We're trying to better make this distinction. We're trying to better explain it. And so I think having the information about when this spills into the other realm is important for us to just take into note as we try to come up with a definition collectively. What is the distinction that you all are already making?
Right. I understand your point.
I'd like to know, and you're familiar with the grievances.
Mhm.
Has there ever been a successful in that they sided with the student? In the GA?
Prior to my
But-
arrival, I believe there were. I have not, I think I've only actually had one grievance. I think I've only seen one grievance about workload since I've been here. That was not
You said there
granted.
was one just recently.
He did an investigation.
I'm aware of one. I've been-
Okay, and so
I'm not on the grievance.
that's okay. if there was one recently, so that was not, is it not resolved currently?
It's resolved.
It's resolved,
It's 2020.
So
okay, and so did they decide that it was excessive
Yeah.
or, okay, and what happened?
I can't go off memory.
Okay,
but I'd
and
be
we can talk
prepared
to our grievance
about
team.
it, or give Patrick a debrief and he can
I
explain
think
it.
that would be really helpful to
Sure.
understand like what that process looked like and how they came to their conclusion. That might give us some information again.
Well, I am interested in establishing the labor rights we are entitled to as employees of UF.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether one person was able to eke out a grievance procedure that helped them, I'm interested in our contract protecting our rights for FTE to be meaningful and for the grievance procedure to make sense.
Yes.
And to do that, there needs to be a distinction from academic work, which you recognized and placed into the contract. And that distinction needs to actually distinguish. It can't just say workload assigned to an employee under this article is separate. It needs to separate. It needs to distinguish,
In
and
order,
we have done so.
in order to engage in the mathematical exercise that you proposed, your contract is putting a hard cap on academic work. Because what you're saying is, the way you've set it up, is that you subtract that out at a constant rate that is capped, and the remainder is defined as excessive work. And what I'm trying to explain is that first part of that, where we're putting a hard cap on an academic workload, is not gonna be something that we're going to agree to put in the
We're
contract.
not though, because academic stuff is handled entirely differently under
Okay.
the academic procedure.
Okay,
People that go to classes, register for those classes, and then attend the hours necessary to do those classes. Any academic requirement works that way, and research could be handled that way. Maybe one person needs to do 10 research credits per semester, and another person needs to do 7. Irrelevant. It's
Okay.
all separate from our labor contract, which is contracted for a certain amount of hours. And if it goes over those hours, it is grievable.
okay,
People could fail, they could be not getting enough of their academic stuff done when they registered for only 2 credit hours
Mhm.
plus their time thing,
What if-
or 0. They could,
If they can agree at 21 hours.
and if it was 0, maybe they're not meeting their requirements.
But
If it was 0 and they're not meeting their requirements, then their advisor would need to be like, listen, you need to put more time here. There's differentials here on how many hours you need to successfully meet these academic goals. That needs to be handled over in the academic section, and it needs to be totally separate from the quantifiable FTE.
all right,
Right.
so let's use an example that we talked about, and you walk me through your analysis based on your proposal.
I got you, Brandon. Give
I
me-
work, I'm in the lab 50 hours a week. Okay, that we're gonna, because I think somebody said that.
Mhm.
I'm registered for 6 hours. And I am in the lab, say I'm an RA, and I'm in the lab 50 hours a week. Walk me through your proposal based on the numbers that I just gave you and
6
explain.
hours times 3 is 18.
Okay,
What's the FTE of that person?
0.5.
0.5?
Okay.
Okay, so they would be contracted for 38 hours then, right? 18 plus 20, 38.
Okay,
Because, and you said they're in there for 50?
right.
They're either doing excessive work or they need to register for more academic hours to reflect the amount of academic time it's clearly requiring to make their academic duties be done.
So in that statement, my interpretation of what you said, I'll say how I interpret what you said is that the academic ability and the ability to conduct academic pursuit is constant at a ratio of 3-to-1. Because you have said, based on those numbers, that person should have to register for more credits because it's taking more time to get the stuff done. That's what you said.
Are they not defined as hours? You register for hours.
Okay, so
So if you're spending more hours doing academic research, you would register for more hours doing academic research.
okay. So have you spent time actually teaching students? Have you
Yes.
taught? Okay. And
Have you?
I've spent an incredible amount of time teaching students.
I didn't know you taught.
Oh, I taught for a long time.
Okay,
And I will tell you that to make a basic statement that all students demonstrate achievement and progress in an academic setting at an exact rate and time of effort
There is no
is
exact.
nonsense.
There is no exact. It's just you register for hours. So hours equals hours, but
Right.
some people might register for more hours than other people. Some
Good.
people might have less hours of registration necessary to meet their academic requirements.
Right.
And some people might have more, but hours should equal hours. That's the equivalency I'm making here.
Okay.
Not that everyone will have the same number of hours,
So let me
but
explain it
that
a different
hours
way.
will mean the same thing for every person.
Let me try to explain it a different way. Okay. When you have a pair of PhD students, they come in at the same semester. Okay? They come in the same semester. All of them in the same discipline and the same program graduate with the same exact number of credits, right?
Not necessarily. Some
no.
people do 5 years, some
It's a
people do
It's a
years, some
huge,
people
it's a
do 3
huge
years.
variation.
Yeah,
It's a huge variation. What do you attribute that variation to?
Difference in efficiency in meeting the program requirements to obtain that degree.
But entering into your analysis of that has nothing to do with their academic ability?
It certainly does, because if somebody does it in 3 years versus 5 years, they met the requirements while registering for less hours, 3 years worth of hours instead of 5 years worth of hours.
So they all graduate with the same number of hours?
No,
No.
if somebody's here registering for a manageable workload for 3 years
Mhm.
and then they meet the requirements
Right.
and leave.
Right.
They registered for less hours over those 3 years than someone who registered for a manageable workload for 5 years,
Mhm.
met the requirements and leave.
Oh, okay, so if I took those two people, extracted all the hours they spent, one did it faster and one did it slower, but they both spent the same amount of total hours in academic.
Hours
pursuit.
meant the same thing for each. They registered for hours to reflect the hours they spent doing academic work.
And I will tell you that I do not believe, I disagree, that those, if I would let you pick them at random. And I added up all the hours they spent on their, forget the work part, on the academic research, and I added up how much time they spent, that those are going to match. They're not.
Right.
They're not gonna.
I'm
match.
not saying they would.
Can
I'm
I,
saying-
sorry, Brendan has been trying to talk
Yeah.
for a
Oh,
while.
sorry.
I think
Standard.
what, at least from where I see the where the issue really lies is that what we're saying is that regardless of their academic performance, we're carving out a set number of hours. They may not work all those hours for the academic side. So, 3 hours per research credit that they're registered for. They may not use it all, or they may use it all and need more. We're not saying we're not limiting or talking about that. We're just saying there just needs to be a set definition of hours across the board, whether they how much they work in those hours or their efficiency in working them or anything like that. It's not really what we're trying to get at. What we're trying to get at is just we need this distinction. We just need this distinction for the hours that's the same across the board so we can grieve when we have excessive workload. But I think all this talk about like how fast they complete the program or anything like that, you're right, that is on the academic side, but we're not trying to limit or do anything like that. We just need something set for us to be able to work with to be able to grieve and handle everything we need to do regarding workload.
Exactly. Full-time equivalent is meaningfully linked to the concept of hours. So when you say there's a full-time equivalency assigned for this position, that needs to mean something and be true. We have that right for it to be true. We have the right to grieve when it is not true.
Right.
And now academic work is also linked to a concept of hours. Hours means the same thing in both cases. We want to enforce FTE and that thing that we are like guaranteed that right as employees, and we want to set aside the academic stuff over here. The hours and the variation in hours, all of that should be reflected in variations of amount of academic hours that people have registered for. All of that is to the side and still measured in hours, but to the side of the 20 hours versus the 0.33 hour, FTE. Those meaningful distinctions need to exist simultaneously.
Right.
And the only way to do that is to carve out academic requirements using the amount of hours we're not imposing that everyone needs to have the exact same level of academic hours or research hours that they have registered for. We're saying that it needs to map on to hours they are registering for.
Right. And that's why we're saying carve out, because we're not trying like I said before, it doesn't matter what happens, that progress during those hours. We just need that carved out, as the word says, to just so we have something to go by. So if that makes sense.
We need to distinguish, academic work from employment work.
Mhm.
And we also separately need to distinguish what excessive workload is.
Should we
And-
move on to the next article?
We have 6 minutes.
We could do it next time.
That's fine. We could start with that one next time.
I mean, if
Closing
that,
thoughts, 6 minutes.
If you guys could bring the information about the grievance, that would be helpful next time we talk
Yeah.
about this. We can work with our grievance team too to see if they have that accessible.
We have talked with the grievance team. If you remember, this definition showed up during last year bargaining during Article 10. This is an ongoing thing that there has been back and forth coordination on this with the entirety of GAU. And we need to distinguish these two forms of work,
Yeah.
like.
yeah, and I
we can- we
I
can
understand.
We can
Sorry.
consider this grievance or that grievance or what happened before you were here, that's fine, but at the end of the day, we need a definition here, and it is ultimately in UF's interest for that definition to be there, because under the interpretation, you're like implying of current contract language, where yes, under the contract, you could refuse to do anything more than 20, but eventually that's gonna bite you academically. Under that interpretation, we could tomorrow in protest of not getting a definition on our contract, start all 4,400 people insisting on only working 20 hours a week. And like mess up the operations because it's contingent on us doing more than we're contracted for.
I think
We do
I
not want to do that, but it is in UF's interest to clarify this. It is not necessarily.
So I just want to caution you, are you really talking about systematically encouraging a work stoppage?
No,
Because that kind of sounds like what you
no,
just
it doesn't sound like that, because I
Actually, it
said,
does by definition.
I said.
You actually just contemplated a work stoppage.
I
in the
did
bargaining
not.
session.
That is
You
incorrect.
absolutely did.
I contemplated a working our
need to
contracted
be done.
hours.
I think we
probably
need to be done for the day.
I contemplated
you guys-
working
I'm gonna tell- you guys need to be
precisely
careful.
no, I
Jacob,
contemplated.
please stop, please. Okay, I'm gonna turn off the Zoom.
Yeah, I think we probably need to be done.
Okay, are you okay?
So
to
you're
talk
walking
about
out early?
post-
We're walking out
Okay.
4 minutes early.
Did not understand.
It's-
Can you just send her an email?
Yeah,
maybe?
you know where.
I'll give you her email address if you don't have it.
all
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, let's keep it.